Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of PS Younger Self. Today I'm joined with a master NLP practitioner who has helped transform thousands of lives with the self-concept model. And he was mentored by one of the pioneers of NLP, which is Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And we're going to explore how our self-identity shapes our relationship dynamics and how we can break through connection barriers. So, Damon Cart, welcome to the show. It's very nice to meet you.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you too.
I think a great place to start our conversation will be first to ask you if you can tell us what NLP is for some of us, including myself, who has heard of the term but may be unfamiliar with it, and
Yeah,
why it's actually, sorry, and how it
yeah,
may be different from other kind of self-development tools or programs.
yeah. I get asked this question all the times, and I find that I answer the question in different ways every time. So let's see how it comes out this time. Neuro-linguistic programming, neuro meaning your five senses, how that information enters your five senses, and then what do you do with that neurologically? How does it affect your behavior? How does it affect what you think, what you believe? Then that sort of brings us into the programming. So basically, you're functioning off of many programs that you've created starting when you were first born, and you start taking in this information. You have to have a way of organizing this information. You're constantly finding ways to fill in the gaps that reality doesn't provide for us. So that's where our beliefs come in. This is where, any thoughts that we have and how we act on those, and then our behavior gives us feedback, and then with that feedback, we keep building meaning and understanding of the world around us so that we can navigate it, survive, even succeed and experience fulfillment. The linguistic part of it is this is one of the major ways that we map reality is through our words. And when I hear someone speaking, I can start to pick up on how they create their map of reality. So we do not live directly from objective reality. We often just kind of assume that. We live from a simulation of that reality that is being represented internally within us. And this is something that NLP, whenever they were putting it together as a technology in the 1970s, this is one of the assertions they would make, and it had not been proven yet. Now, as neuroscience has become a flourishing field in a very new but flourishing field of science, they have been proving this over and over again. We do not live directly from objective reality. We live from the simulation in our minds. And in NLP, we often refer to that as our representations. Now, language is such an important one of those because as I'm speaking right now and you're listening to me and the audience is listening to me, you're not going through every word that I'm saying. There's no little person in your head who's looking up every word to define it, to make meaning of what I'm saying. That would take way too long. You would still be trying to understand the first few sentences I said. But that's not happening. As I'm speaking, you're understanding exactly what I'm saying as it's happening. Well, how are we able to do that without trying to process it through like a dictionary style of understanding it? That's because as you're hearing my words, it's creating representations in your mind that you are already familiar with. You already know the language that I'm speaking, and you have your own representations that you're plugging into that. So really what I'm doing right now is I'm transferring a map of reality to you via a model, in this case a language one, and you're plugging in your representations to understand what it is that I'm saying. And this is like a really fascinating thing to think about because otherwise, before we had language, in order to communicate, I had to go and show you an apple if I wanted to say something about an apple or I was trying to communicate something about an apple. But I can just say the word apple. You already know what an apple is. You've had your own experiences with that. So you take the coding, APPLE, and you plug in your representation to it. So language is one of the greatest maps of reality that we already have, that we've been cultivating since we were born. And so we have so much programming built into language. It's not the only one. It's not the only map that we have, but it's a major one. And then we're talking about communication. So communication is one of the most important things that we do. If without communication, we wouldn't have all the wonderful things that we have. And we think about anything that we have been able to create as a species, a civilization. So much of this is based on language and communication.
Mhm.
And so that's why the language part is so important because it's one of the major maps that we use to navigate reality.
Got
The
it.
second part of your question about what makes this different. So
Mhm.
much of personal development, it's a lot of encouragement, it's a lot of motivation, and all that stuff is fine. I don't see any problem with that. What what neurolinguistic programming does is it takes that a step further and says, okay, if you have two people and they're about the same age, they grew up in the same town, they grew up with, say, the same amount of income from their family, so they had all the same basic stuff, basic resources. One is very successful, grows up to be very successful, and one doesn't. Or one, it becomes very happy in life, and the other one doesn't. So it's obvious that the external circumstances didn't create that. So what was going on inside of them, each of them, that created the reality of being
Mhm.
successful or maybe being very happy? So one of the things that NLP is about is modeling success. So
Mhm.
if you have all the external resources yet you're not successful, then we understand that there has to be something that is going on internally, a way that you're representing reality in an impoverished way that is holding you back from fulfilling your potential. And so that's the idea behind NLP in the beginning, was modeling. How do we model excellence? How do we find out those internal structures that these people are using to represent their reality? And once we find those universal structures, can we map that across to people who are not successful or who are
Mhm.
not getting what they want, and see what happens? And over again, they were able to replicate that. And by basically modifying your internal representations, first of all, you have to become aware of them. Most people are not. This is very
Exactly.
unconscious. Then you can modify them to match someone else who is being very successful, and let's see what happens. And over again, they had people going from being really unhappy. They started with therapists and modeling therapists. People going from being really unhappy or having severe problems to overcoming those very quickly. And it was just a matter of changing the representation. So if you compare that, say, to like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is also closely linked with the philosophy of Stoicism, which is very popular now, like these are
Mhm.
all great things, but they're more you trying to like get this into your psyche, get this into your unconscious. And maybe by repeating it or reading it over and over again, or with a good CBT therapist, you really pull this stuff out and start working on it rationally and thinking about it. All of that is great. But what's missing from that is this deeper unconscious levels that have all these structures in place, that is holding all the information, that holds all your beliefs in place. And so if we can get in there and then say, okay, well, how do we apply this structure to new information, or how can we ask questions that brings new information in, and that will change your internal representations? This is why NLP is so fast when it works. It often does work very fast because all we need to do is work in structure, not try to change the content.
Wow, that was fascinating. And it sounds like, thank you. No, no, no. When you were describing it, a lot of it sounded also kind of like our different programming languages, like
Mhm.
in our brain. And I want to get to more of this representation and internal structure you talk about and how that shapes our identity. And it kind of sounds like it's tapping into our subconscious beliefs.
Mhm.
But before we get there, because that will really set the stage for our conversation around the topic, I'm really curious, and I think it'll be great for the audience to hear too, because you are a master NLP practitioner, obviously very versed. You help thousands of people. You have a big channel on YouTube. I'm assuming, but please tell us, like, there's a personal experience you might did you have a personal experience in transformation with NLP to make you so passionate and to
Mhm.
build a life around helping people with this framework and model?
Yes, I have several. I'll keep it to, I'll try to make it as brief as possible. When I was in college, I had a professor who taught a class called the Philosophy of Psychology. And he basically brought out all the major therapies, starting back from, I think it was William James and then Sigmund Freud, and then getting into Gestalt therapy. And he taught us how to hypnotize each other. We had a lot of fun with that. And he would do demonstrations in the class of hypnotizing people and hypnotizing them to be drunk. Or he would want to do Gestalt therapy demonstrations. And I was raising my hand for every single one of these. I thought it was fascinating. I was actually in film school at the time, so it wasn't really my area of study, but I was fascinated by it. And then at the end of the class, the last few weeks, he breaks out this thing called NLP, and he's like, "This is the mother of them all. This is the one that sort of models all the things that works and then brings it all together." And he explained it, and I really didn't really have a strong understanding of it. Kind of like what you're talking about, where it's like, you ask the question, you have a little exposure to NLP, but it's really hard to understand it because it's very
Hmm.
experiential. You really have to get in there and experience it to understand it. So anyway, a couple of years later, I graduated college. A lot of not so good things happened to me, and not terrible, not disastrous, but it made me sort of afraid to go outside my front door. I started just kind of shutting down, and I gradually find myself in a depression, and I didn't even know it because I didn't know what depression really felt like. And suddenly it's like, wait a minute, the past 6 to 9 months, I've really been down, and I feel like I'm in a hole and I can't pull myself out. So I didn't have health insurance at the time. I was looking for a therapist who would work with me at a lower rate because I didn't have much money. And suddenly it dawned on me that my professor, he would probably help me. So I reached out to him and I just explained the situation I was in. So he calls me into his office and he says, "I don't believe in a free service, but I also don't need your money. So why don't you come back next week? We'll do a session, and every time we do a session, you donate your time or money to charity." I was like, "Deal, let's do
Oh,
this."
wow.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So the next week I came back, and in one hour session, the depression was gone. It was
Oh, no.
absolutely gone. Yeah. And I was like,
How do you
wait a
know
minute.
it was gone?
What's that?
How do you know in 1 hour it was gone?
I just wasn't depressed anymore. And I was like, wait, this can't be right. Because I'd heard, this takes months to overcome, maybe even medication. And I remember walking out of his office and I was just like, this just can't be right. I wasn't the same person who walked in here. I'm a different person walking out. I mean, I'm the same person, but I'm not depressed anymore. And I went back to his office a week later because that's what we had scheduled. And he starts asking me questions, and I go, I don't think I'm depressed anymore. This past week, I have not been depressed. And that was the other thing. I was thinking maybe this was just temporary.
Hmm.
Maybe I'll walk out of here and tomorrow I'll be back into my
Yeah.
depression. I wasn't. And that lasted for 10 years. Then I find myself in another depression 10 years later, completely unrelated. I'm living in a different place. I'm now living in where I live now, Santa Cruz, California. So many things in my life just was not working out. And I go to therapy again, not with my professor. He's retired, living in a completely different state. And I go to traditional therapy. And it takes me a year to come out of this depression. This is more what I expected, more what people, know and believe or think about, what it takes to come out of depression. And I thought to myself, I need to start treating my mental health the same way that you would treat your physical health. It needs to be ongoing. You don't just go work out once or eat one healthy
Yeah.
meal. You take care of your mental health. And I had discovered while I was there, after I'd moved to Santa Cruz, that Santa Cruz was where NLP was created up at the university. Now, there weren't many people teaching NLP at the time, still aren't here in Santa Cruz, but there was a group that still held a training every summer up at the University of Santa Cruz, California. So I didn't have the money. I was, not in the best situation, but I was like, you know what? I need to do this. I have to do this. And I began my training. And as soon as I started, it was like coming home. It was like this, it felt like I was always meant to do this. And I just trained in NLP and in hypnosis for that entire next year. And then following up came in for the master practitioner training, and I transformed some beliefs, and my life just completely changed. I realized the business I was in was making me miserable. I realized that my marriage was pretty much over. These were things that I wasn't willing to admit to myself for years, and that's kind of what got me into the depression to begin with. And now it was like I was awake, and the solutions that I was looking for, they had always been right in front of me. I just could not see them. I was blinded by my limitations of my map of reality, and suddenly I could see past them. And from that point on, my life has not been the same since. I've not been depressed since. That was like 13 years ago. So
Mhm.
yeah, and I could tell you about
Yeah.
more, but there's a lot.
No, no, I think that was really powerful, and especially when, I mean, you heard my initial reaction, like in 1 hour, like how do you
Yeah,
know? But I guess when you know,
yeah,
in a lot of things, you just have that feeling, and you can tell, and who am I or anyone else to tell you anything different? And clearly it has, with the success you've been having and thousands of lives you've been helping to transform. Clearly this is a powerful mission. And so I think it's really incredible to always hear someone's history of how and why they arrived at what they are doing, especially when they're doing it so passionately. So thank you. So let's start on this kind of self identity, because clearly you went through that. And how does, like, knowing about ourselves, our self awareness, our self identity of who we are, what we think about ourselves, shape our relationship dynamics? And I'm sure that's what's played in kind of your past experience.
So you mean our relationships with others?
Yes, relationship with others. Yeah, how does how we feel about ourselves and what we think about ourselves influence the relationship dynamics?
Ooh, that's a really big question. So I could go in a lot of different directions with that. So if we take a big step back
Yeah.
and we ask ourselves, are we living the life that we value? Do I do I get to do a lot of the things in my life that align with my values? If not, I'm going to suffer from low self-esteem. So, for
Hmm.
example, if I value success and I don't believe I'm a successful person, and because I don't believe it, my behavior doesn't really align with success. It more aligns with failure. And this is the strange thing that we do as humans.
Hmm.
Our beliefs are our best way of sort of grappling with reality. We're always looking for certainty. We're always looking to move away from chaos and what is unknown. So we would rather feel certain in our beliefs, even if those beliefs are very limiting and even painful. We're not hardwired to be successful. We're hardwired to survive. And how do we survive? Through certainty and what's familiar and what feels more, I guess, comfortable in a sense.
Hmm.
So we cultivate these beliefs about ourselves, and a lot of times they do not align with our values. And most people don't even know what their values are because that's a process of reaching in there and sort of teasing them out of your unconscious. And so we don't know why we're suffering most of the time, and we don't know why we don't feel good about ourselves or that we experience a lot of self-doubt. Now, I'll use myself as an example. When I was coming out of my first marriage, I was getting a divorce. There was still a lot that I did not understand about self-concept, about identity. I was at the very beginning stages of being mentored by Steve Andreas, who eventually taught me his self-concept model. So what I didn't understand is there was still a lot that I didn't feel good about myself. There was still a lot of me having to figure out, well, what are my values and how do I align to them? Now,
Hmm.
when you're in that place and you feel wounded and your self-esteem feels lower than it should be, or your confidence feels lower than it should be, when it comes to relationships, you have to then ask yourself, well, what kind of person am I attracting if I'm coming from a place of being wounded, or if I'm coming from a place of I don't feel good about myself? You're you could attract people who want to help you, and I did. That was one area, but then you're also probably going to attract people who want to take advantage of you. And so
Hmm.
that's one way that this is going to shape your relationships in a very negative way. If you're putting out there in your communication that you're wounded, you doubt yourself, you don't feel good about yourself. And believe me, you're doing that whether you realize it or not, because most of our communication is nonverbal and very unconscious. You are going to attract people who are likely to take advantage of that. And it could be extremely subtle. That was the other thing that I didn't expect is
Hmm.
I would be a year into a relationship, let's say a romantic relationship, and then I start to notice this person is trying to control me. And it's like, well, what's going on here? And then I had to realize that there must be something that I'm putting out there that's attracting this kind of person, because this is like the third or fourth person who's been doing this. And that was whenever I took that upon myself to say, okay, I need to understand myself better because there's something I'm putting out there, a certain vulnerability that is communicating to certain women in this case, because it was more like an intimate relationship
Hmm.
situation. that they can take advantage of me this way. And so once I understood that, once I could see what it was I was doing, and then I could see what they were doing, and then it all made sense to me, and I would just call it out. And these were very passive aggressive people. That seemed to be what I was attracting. And the last thing a passive aggressive person wants is to be called out. That's why it's passive aggressive. They don't want to be exposed. They want to be able to sort of manipulate you, possibly even harm you, or whatever it is they're doing to move you in the direction that they want you to move you, and without you realizing it's them. When you call them out, they run. They get away from you very quickly. And so that was one area in which I had to understand myself better, to then understand what I was putting out there, to understand what kind of person I'm attracting, and then modify that. Now, what most people will do, and I did for most of my life, is just blame other people. It's like I could have
Mhm.
just blamed women for it and said, this is how all women are. And, it's,
Victimize themselves.
what's that?
And victimize themselves.
Yeah,
They're the
yeah,
victim.
and right. And instead, I was like, no, I don't believe this about all women. This is just a certain kind of person I'm attracting because of something I'm putting out there. And you see this in relationships a lot. You see, especially in very dysfunctional or codependent relationships, where it's sort of like they attract each other. One's more the wounded, one's
Mhm.
protector, or there's I don't know. There's a lot of ways that these two will attract each other, but it's from a place of dysfunction. And you don't want to have relationships like that, because then they become dysfunctional, codependent relationships.
Wow. What you just mentioned, the later part, why I apologize, I interjected about how someone being the victim, because I think
Mhm.
it's common. I've seen it. I've definitely been there in the past. And the way you described and how you mentioned how you had to understand yourself better. You recognized patterns in your past relationship where, oh, it seems like this is not the first person that's trying to manipulate me.
Mhm.
And I had a similar kind of realization. But to me, that really hones in on you being self aware, though, right? To be able to even recognize the pattern, to then understand yourself better and go on this exploratory kind of journey to understand yourself better and change the pattern. But as you, I believe, alluded to earlier in our conversation, that many people don't know what's happening. They're kind of on autopilot. And I
Mhm.
believe that that is true. So where does it start from us understanding ourselves better? Is it self-awareness? If that's the case, how do we develop it? Like where does one start in understanding their self better and this identity of themselves?
Okay, I can answer that by answering, do you want to know the secret to mastering NLP, truly mastering NLP?
Yes, let's share, let's spill it. I have the
Yeah,
master NLP practitioner here, so don't hold back.
I was just discussing this with my team, because we do train coaches in the self-concept model, which is an NLP model that my mentor,
Mhm.
Steve Andreas, taught me. And the biggest reason we see people not do well in learning this model, or not becoming effective, and it's the same thing with all of NLP, is people get into learning NLP and they're far more focused on doing it to or on other people. Maybe they're a coach and they want to become, or they want to become a coach, so they want to learn how to be very effective with clients. That's great. That's normal. We should do that. Or they are interested in sales, persuasion, influence. And so all of this, all of what they're learning about NLP is directed at other people. The key to mastering NLP, truly mastering NLP, is to master it on yourself. To take
Mhm.
the processes that you learn, the models that you learn, and you first and foremost, more than anyone else, you practice on yourself. Now, I kind of lucked into this, to tell you the truth, because when I started my NLP training, I had no interest in becoming a coach or a teacher. I was trying to fix my marriage, and I was trying to fix my insurance business. And I was convinced at this point that NLP was going to lead me there, to find what I needed to find to fix this. And it
Mhm.
did, and it didn't. It made me realize that these were not really good fits for me. The marriage wasn't a good fit, nor was the business. But the good part about this is, while I was training, pretty much everyone I was training alongside were coaches and teachers. and they just assumed that I was a coach. And then after a while, we would do breakout sessions and we'd practice processes and techniques. And people were like, wow, you're pretty good at this. How long have you been coaching? And I was like, I don't coach. I'm not a coach. And they were like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, working on my insurance business. And people were like, what? Because most of the people there were pursuing coaching and teaching. And this really gave me the space to focus on myself, master the processes on myself. And then I did create a practice group where I was able to work with other people. And that is really truly how you master NLP, is you master it on yourself and you master it with other people. John Grinder, one of the founders of NLP, has defined mastery in NLP as the ability to use it effectively on yourself and with other people. So the only reason why I really wanted to practice with other people is so I would become better at using it on myself. I was still not thinking in terms of coaching. I did a full year of immersive NLP and hypnosis training before I ever coached anyone, before I ever said, okay, I'm going to give this coaching thing a try. And I feel like that was backwards compared to what most people do, but it was the thing that helped me catapult myself further along than what most people are in a year's time of learning and practicing NLP. So if you want to master NLP, you have to at least put equal amount of time of using it on yourself as you would with other people. But most people go, oh, I'm a coach, I just want to help people. That's great. But if you don't practice on yourself, if you don't apply it to yourself, you will never become the coach you could be. So it's extremely important. Now, I actually forgot what your original question was, but it was related to what I'm explaining here. What was your question?
To repeat it. Yeah, it was if one wants to better understand themselves and recognize
Hmm.
these patterns of how their self-belief influences their relationships, because you gave a great example how you are recognizing these past patterns in your relationships that made you curious to understand yourself better. But many of us walk around this world unconsciously or in autopilot.
Mhm.
So, how does one even get to this state of understanding themselves better? Is it self-awareness? Where does one start? Because that self-belief shapes our identity, right?
Mhm.
So, where does one start?
Yeah. So the short answer is to apply NLP on yourself. And uh, so there's a lot of built into NLP, especially the founders. They were going through this period of what they call radical self-reliance. It's
Radical self-reliance.
taking your experience of life and completely owning it and saying, okay, whatever I'm experiencing, not now, we're not saying that like if bad things happen to you, if you suddenly find that you have cancer or you're in a car accident, those things are not your fault. Okay, I'm not trying to say that. It's your
Mhm,
experience of life. How do you feel about it? What are you
mhm,
experiencing? That
mhm.
we take full responsibility for. And that was the spirit of
That's
NLP when
good.
it was being created. Not that every NLP practitioner follows that, but that if you understand the spirit of NLP, the way it was created, you'll be able to leverage NLP a lot better. So it's this idea that I am going to take on that responsibility
Mhm.
of my life experience. There's a presupposition in NLP that the meaning of a communication is the response that it gets. Now that's extreme. That's taking like
The
100%
me-
responsibility. The meaning of
yes.
a communication is the response it gets. That means if I say something here and you and your audience perceive it in a different way than I meant it, it's up to me to adjust my communication to then communicate it in such a way that you understand it the way that I mean it. It's
Mhm,
not
mhm.
you're wrong for not understanding it the way that I mean it, right? So
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
taking full responsibility for my communication. And if you don't understand the way that I'm explaining it, it's up to me to make those adjustments until you do.
Mhm,
So we treat life the same way. If I'm not having the kind of life experience that I want to have, it's up to me to make the adjustments to make that better, not it's the economy's fault. It's my ex-wife's fault. Or, it's like, it's easy to blame, but it doesn't get you anywhere. In fact, it does the exact opposite and it disempowers you completely. So in NLP, whatever experience I'm having, if it's a problem, then I want to go find the right process, the right technique, to adjust myself so that I can get what I want out of that experience. And this is not about blame. This is if I get in on that game of, okay, I'm not going to blame other people. I'm just going to blame myself. I'm going to judge myself and I'm going to pile on all this shame. And no, that's not it either. It's just basically saying, okay, I need to understand how I'm passing whatever information I'm gathering around me. If
Mhm.
if if I'm receiving that information and I'm making misery out of this or depression out of it, then it's up to me to adjust those structures so that I can change them and feel better about whatever's happening. And so NLP is full of all these patterns to look for, models, even communication models like how am I speaking. The meta model is the first NLP model that was a way of understanding a person's map of reality and what was missing for their map of reality or what is missing so that you can ask them good questions to bring that information back in. There's usually a lot of missing pieces of information that cause us to suffer. And so then it goes on from there. So like the self-concept model is a way of understanding your beliefs about yourself and how that has constructed your total sense of self, which is what self-concept is. And then
Mhm.
how you feel about that is where we get self-esteem. Now, what most people are doing in personal development, this is, yes, what's different about NLP than most of what's out there. Most of the personal development out there, especially when it comes to confidence and self-esteem, try to go at confidence and self-esteem directly. Affirmations would be a good example of this. And this does not work and this is where we get into the problem with trying to take content and smashing it into a person, and it's all about structure. So if I look in a mirror and I know that I do not have $1 billion, but I tell myself in the mirror, I'm a billionaire, I'm a billionaire. I'm taking content and trying to smash it into my brain and try to make me believe that I am this, and this just makes us more delusional. And then there's a part of us that has to reconcile the fact that this is not real. There is a reality, and the reality is I'm not a billionaire. And then there's part of me that's fighting with myself to try to make me believe it. That's not where it's at. So it's about creating the structures in. Let's use success. That's a good one. So
Mhm.
if I don't believe I'm a success, I believe I'm a failure, but I value success, I'm going to feel bad about myself. That's just how values work. If you're not aligning to your values, you're going to feel bad about yourself. You're going to have lowered self-esteem. Now, so does that mean I can say a bunch of affirmations and try to convince myself that I'm actually successful and this is going to work? It's never worked for me, and in fact, it creates a lot more friction. What I can do, where I can start, there's a lot to this, but where I can start is I can say, okay, have I ever had a successful experience in my life? And if I ask myself that honestly, yeah, I have to say yes. And then I can ask myself, does it make any sense to not include even the smallest examples of me being successful? Now, some people would be like, well, yeah, I got to hold myself to this really high standard. Okay, that's a different thing. But
Mhm.
let's gather all of the possible information in my life that supports me being successful. And what that information will do, it'll be very supportive of me being successful. And the experiences themselves, there's kind of like a playbook that tells me, well, how do I do success in my life? Here's several examples of that. And
Mhm.
then I have to also pay attention to, well, what did I consider a failure, the failures in my life? And then I can ask the question, does that really say something about who I am? Or does that say something about the way I did something which didn't work out, which means it's not so much about me, it's just about I just have to change up what I did, try something different. And in
Mhm.
NLP we say there's no such thing as failure, there's only feedback. So it's
Mhm.
not about me being this horrible, terrible person who's just a failure. So that's one belief a person would have. Let's bust that up and say, no, this is just several ways I tried something that didn't work out. So now all I need to do use that feedback and adjust what I was doing and try it a different way. Now I'm really simplifying this because otherwise I have to get into like the model and the structures and everything that works this way. But yeah, this is the beginning of understanding it. So it's letting go of these judgments of ourselves and just looking under the hood and say, okay, how would I have to structure this information in order for me to believe I'm a failure? And then how would I need to restructure that information for me to tap into and feel that I actually know I've had many successes in my life. I am successful and I can believe that and then build upon that. And so that's there's a lot that goes into it. It's kind of a rabbit hole, but that's a good introduction.
Yeah, no, but fascinating way to approach it. But then if is about letting go of the judgment of ourselves, which is such a powerful message. And I feel like kind of this umbrella of everything that you shared so far of what I'm understanding about NLP. It's a very empowering message. I love it because as you said, that it's taking this full responsibility and learning to kind of like reframe like the example of failure. I love that example because I agree as well. Like failure is just information rich, like just data of what didn't work and how can I adjust. We can start with letting go of a judgment of ourselves. How can we again start with exploring like what is our belief? Like for example, what of my I believe like limiting self-belief that I've done a lot of work and have understood that it kind of manifested not only manifested in my romantic relationships, believe because it stemmed from my relationship with my mother, which was this never being good enough.
Hmm.
But using NLP, can you share, help people? How can people explore what their personal beliefs are about their identity? What if they don't even know? What if they're, again, like walking around, like, I don't know, I'm telling myself, Damon, and I'm glad you brought up the example of affirmations because I personally have been very skeptical. I don't subscribe to saying affirmations to myself every day because I'm like that,
Hmm.
telling myself yeah, I'm gonna have 1 million subscribers overnight. It's not gonna happen, first of all, because I gotta show up and do the work, right? But so how do people even discover what are their beliefs? What if they say like Damon, like, well, I don't know what I believe. I think I'm great, but that doesn't
Hmm.
say much.
Yeah, so in NLP, another thing we say is if you don't want anything, NLP really can't help you. So it starts with what do you want? And when we know what we want, even if, because
Mm.
some people say, well, what if I don't know what I want? I say, do you want to know what you want? Like, we can start there. If we have to get that, if we have to take that many steps back, we can do that. And most people do. Even if they can't pinpoint exactly what it is they want, but at least we know that you want to know what you want. Okay.
Mm.
Once we have some clarity about that, then we just go into, well, what's stopping you? Okay. Now,
Mm.
when I take, so very classic, basic NLP is you want something, and that's what we call the present state. You're in a state of lack. You want something that you don't have. And then
Mhm.
whatever it is that you do want, the state of having it is what we would call the desired state. Okay. And
Mhm.
then in very basic terms, and that's why the reason why we refer to it as a state is because one thing that we know is that by either achieving or acquiring something doesn't really change anything about who you are. It's your perception of it. It's what meaning you make of that. So I'm sure you've had the experience. I'm sure many of your listeners have had the experience, and I know this for a fact because most of the people I coach are very successful people who are very unfulfilled. Okay, and they're coming to me to like, I don't understand this. On paper I'm as successful as I could possibly be. I've got the seven-figure business. I've got the wife, the kids, the big house, and I'm miserable.
Mhm. It's called.
Achieving things and money and material possessions and even like big achievements doesn't necessarily make us happy. And you've achieved things before and you go, wow, that's not what I expected. I thought it would be more rewarding, more fulfilling. So that's why we refer to it as a state. So when you want something that you don't have, you're in we call it the present state. You're in a state of lack and you want something different. We want to understand, well, if you were to have the thing or acquire the thing or achieve the thing that you're after, we want to understand, well, what state would that put you in? And so all we really need to focus on is what resources are you not accessing right now, that if you did access them, you would experience the resourcefulness of that desired state. And then from there, it would be a lot easier for you to acquire that thing that you want. So if I come from a place of lack and impoverished map of reality that's missing resources and I'm trying to achieve this thing, that's going to probably create a lot of suffering. It's going to be painful. It's going to be hard to get there. Okay. And even when I get there, that doesn't mean that I'm actually going to access those resources. I might not, and so I'm just going to feel just as bad once I have the thing. There's just going to be some relief from the fact that I'm not having to claw at it and fight for it anymore. So in NLP, we want to go straight to the resourceful state, and then that makes it a lot easier to acquire it. You were going to ask something?
Yeah, no, no, no. Like I really like this flow, and I wanted, if I may, if you can help us walk through, because I want to circle back to the kind of topic of the conversation, because this framework I think will be perfectly tied. If you can give us an example, because a lot of people, I know in my circle of friends, and just like in society, it's very common that the dating world is very difficult, more difficult than ever. A lot of people want relationship, and it's harder. So tying it back to again our topic, and if you shared with us this framework, right? If the present state is I want to be in a relationship, no, yeah, what do you want? I want to be in a relationship. That's a desired state, but I don't have one. How can I get to the desired state? By exploring
Mhm.
my belief about myself and how that's manifesting in relationships to secure the healthy kind of desired kind of relationship. Is
Okay.
it okay if you
So
walk us through that?
yeah, do you want to be the client and I'll be the coach?
Sure.
Okay. We can you can make it up if you want, or you can use your actual situation. It doesn't really matter. Um,
Well, the
so
example, let's start with, yeah. So let's say that I came to you and said, Damon, I'm struggling. I recognize a pattern in my relationship. I want to be in a fulfilling relationship. That's my desired state.
mhm.
How can I discover what's stopping me, or is part of my self identity influencing my relationship dynamics, and how and why I cannot be in one?
Are you starting from a place of you're not in a relationship now and you want to be in a relationship, or you're in a relationship right now but it's not going well?
A former. Let's use the example of former. Yeah.
So you're not
Not
in a
in one,
relationship.
want to be in one. Yes.
Okay.
Any of those
So
people. Really.
you're coming to me and telling me you are not in a relationship and you want to be in one,
Hmm.
right? So then I would ask you, what would being in a relationship do for you?
It would make me feel secure
Okay.
and safe, emotionally safe.
Okay. So we could have a good discussion on just this because I think your answers are very common and it also points at something very specific, but I don't want to derail what we're doing, so I'm going to keep going. So then I would ask you, okay, what is feeling secure and safe in a relationship? What would that do for you if you were feeling secure and safe in a relationship?
What would that do for me, as in like my emotional state, or
What's important to you about that?
um it would make me feel like I have someone to rely on to create a life together. And the reason why I mentioned emotional safety is because that's a very important value of mine.
Mhm.
So anytime that I want to share, whether it's having a hard time or I'm just down, it's someone that I can go to express that and feel emotionally safe that I will be seen and heard.
Okay,
So,
so you did something interesting. Instead of moving on to a higher value, which would tell us more about what will fulfill you in a relationship, you gave me the criteria. You said, well,
oh,
secure and safety would be if I had someone to rely on, talk to, and you did actually bring up at least one other value, which was share. You want to someone to share these things with.
oh,
So that's
okay.
interesting. So I'm going to go back to so if you had that person who you could rely on, who you felt safe and secure with, what would that do for you?
What would that do for me? I mean, it would make me feel like I have a partner in life.
So you
What
went
do
to you went to the logistics of it. So you make you feel like you have a partner. Let's hold with that. What does having a partner like that? What does it do for you? What's important to you about that? What is important to you about that?
what is important? To me, it still goes back to like someone I can rely on. For example, let
Okay.
me let me expand.
So, well,
Um,
so we're getting into content again here, and I want to stay out of this because I think something's really important is coming up. So if you had that kind of partner, what would
Hmm.
that do for you?
Expand my life
Okay.
in
Okay. And what's important about expanding your life?
shared experiences,
Right.
new growth.
Okay. Well, okay. And what is important to you about sharing your experiences with someone?
Life is better shared. I think it just expands the emotional state. For example, like if I experience even something as small as, let's say, like, when you see something really funny, you want to share with someone to share, to have that shared experience of that laughter or whatever. It's just more amplified when you share it with someone. So for me, having that like life partner who you can rely on, just life experiences feel more expansive, amplified, and just more powerful.
Okay. So if you were experiencing all that with a partner you could rely on,
Hmm.
what would that do for you?
You keep going back now. Like,
Yeah.
that do for me? Did I not answer it?
So I can tell what. So are you not in a relationship right now,
Not anymore. No.
and you're looking to be in a relationship?
No, not immediate. No, not
So you did
immediate.
share some good values here, and the reason why I kept asking the same questions is because you were giving me a lot of content and a lot of criteria, and that's fine. It's fine. It's fine to know how we go about how you're basically telling me how you want to share your life with someone. What would be some more specific details? You talk about something that's funny. You share that with your partner. It amplifies the experience because you get to share it. So you're telling me the how of how you would fulfill sharing, which is great. What's missing here, and the reason why you were hesitating is because what I'm asking here is something that's deeply unconscious for you, and it is for most people. And so
Yeah.
when you can start to tease out these values, the values that are really driving what you're doing, what you're wanting, when they're unconscious, they're sort of in control of you. And when you don't have the conscious awareness to bring to it, your decisions are not going to always align very well with it because one hand's not talking to the other. The unconscious isn't communicating and isn't
Mhm.
aligned with your conscious. Okay. And this is the truth for most people. So I'm not picking on you.
No.
So when I'm asking these questions and you're struggling to find those deeper values, it just means that you haven't been conscious of them. And when you do become conscious of them, then you can start really pointing and aiming your decisions in alignment with those values. And it will become a lot easier to recognize that partner who does align with these values. So the more clarity you have about them, the better able you're going to be able to find that partner, make decisions that are aligned with it. And every time you do that, your self-esteem is actually going to go up. Your confidence about yourself is going to go up. And again, like I was mentioning before, when your confidence and your self-esteem is high versus wounded and low, what kind of partner do you think you're going to attract? One who is more in
Hmm.
alignment with that, which is good. And so when we're wounded and we have, I'm not saying you have low self-esteem or any of that, but when we're wounded and we have low self-esteem and we don't feel good enough and all of those things, and we do attract partners, we often attract what we're putting out there, and that usually just creates the next, not so good relationship that is eventually going to end. Whereas when you can pull all of these values out, that's really driving you to want what you want, and you're very
Hmm.
clear about them, you're going to make much, much better decisions about the next partner who you will find and getting into a relationship. You're going to understand this a lot better when you're coming from that place of already knowing what really does it for you. Now, when people are focused on security and safety right from the beginning a lot, that tells me that they're very focused on what they're afraid of. They're very focused on what they don't want. And when you're very focused on what you don't want, guess what? You get a lot more of it. And the reason is it's not some vibrational manifestation stuff.
Hmm.
It's because if that's what I'm paying attention to, what I'm doing is I'm informing my unconscious. I'm giving it a lot of information. And your unconscious doesn't know the difference between what you consciously want and what you consciously don't want. All it
Hmm.
knows is the information you give it. And it's hardwired to move away from confusion and chaos and to move toward clarity. So if you're focusing on more of what you don't want, you're feeding your unconscious a lot of clarity about what you don't want. So it's going to keep taking you there. And these are those people who keep having the same problematic relationships with the same problematic personality type, is because even when they get out of that relationship, they're telling themselves, okay, don't get in a relationship with a person like that anymore. Then their focus becomes that person. And then, of course, their response to that is, I want a secure and safe relationship because I don't want that. And so they become very focused on security and safety. The truth is about security and safety, there's not a lot of fulfillment in it. It's necessary. We need to feel at least a little safe. We need to feel at least a little secure in order to move on to higher values. But if our focus is just security and safety, we can't do that, and we're only focused on our fears. And this goes for anything. This isn't just about relationships. And I'll do this with clients. They'll be like, well, no, security and safety, that's the most important thing in my life right now. And let's say I'm coaching them on their career, and then I'll say, okay, well, how far do you want to take this? Do you want to hire a bodyguard? Do you want to wear a bulletproof vest? Like, how far do we want to go with security and safety? I know that sounds silly, but that's just it. There's not much fulfillment in it. Once you feel enough security, then we want to move on to things like happiness and joy. And you mentioned growth and sharing. That would all be a part of that. But if we're too focused on what we don't want, then we just feel scared. And then we hyper focus on security and safety, which, like I said, is not very fulfilling. Once you feel secure, if you were to like try to increase that security and increase that safety, it gets very boring. There's not fulfillment in that. We need enough, but once we
Why?
have enough, then we move on.
Why is that not fulfilling? Because I would challenge that. I, and what I meant, say emotional safety is not being abused, because obviously, I mean, that's a given. Who wants to be in an abusive relationship, whether it's
Mhm.
verbal or physical? No, it's actually about a person having emotional intelligence to tap into creating a safe space for me to
Mhm.
be vulnerable
Mhm.
and actively listen versus, and I've even experienced this, I realized in female friendships where I'm like, oh, she's actually not providing emotional safety, where I am being vulnerable, expressing my emotional needs, and it's being met with turning the conversation back on them, about them, and not actively creating a safe space for me to be heard and understood and being seen. And that's what I meant. And to me, because I've done a lot of values work for myself too, through like values audit and conditioning tests, and I've only come to realize, wow, like this is an important value of mine, especially because
Mhm.
I had it in this last relationship. Like I've never experienced someone creating that emotional safety. So to me, I find that incredibly fulfilling, but I'm curious, like why is it, why do you say that it's not fulfilling? Because it makes you focus on what you don't have.
So everything that you just explained was to feel secure and safe in order to. You're you want to feel secure and safe to get to another level of like intimacy to fulfill higher values. So that's my
Uh,
point.
uh,
If you felt safe and secure and
mhm,
that was enough and you felt fulfilled, then you'd just be like, oh, cool, here I am. I'm here. I'm secure. I'm safe. I don't need to share anything. I don't need to do anything. This is
mhm,
fulfilling enough. But that's not why we want security and safety. But most of us can't see past our fears. Okay, so
mhm,
we focus on our fears. Therefore, we value safety and security way more than what we should. And then we go after that and it never feels like enough because as long as we keep feeding our unconscious the things that are focusing on the things that we don't want, which then triggers us to focus on security, it doesn't matter how much safety we create for ourselves, it's never going to be enough. And in a relationship that will shut you down because you'll always feel like, well, I don't feel safe enough, and then you'll try to look for more and more ways to find safety. But if you can see past that and you go, yeah, I understand why I want to feel safe and secure, and who doesn't? I'm not saying that that's not something good to have. You need that in a relationship. It's I want to feel secure and safe so that I feel comfortable sharing, and when I'm sharing, I feel at peace. And when I'm at peace, I feel happy in the relationship. And when I'm happy in the relationship, then it really allows me to be passionate. So I'm just giving you the
mhm,
ways in which we find out those higher and higher values. And so what we find out is, well, what you really want is those really fulfilling values like happiness and passion and peace. That's what you're really after. Now we know you have to feel at least a little bit of safety to get there, but that's where we want to put our attention. We want to put our focus on those higher values, and we know that in order to get there, I have to sort out my fears. I have to sort out my
Yes.
limitations. And this is how we tease out the limitations and the fears, because that's what you were asking is like, well, how do I overcome this? How do I get to know myself and how do I get to overcome my problems and my limitations? Well, we first start off by focusing on the top of the mountain. And that's how we figure out how to get up there. Or that's how we figure out, well, what are the problems? What are the things that are going to slow us down or get in our way? What are the obstacles? Well, first, we need to know where we really want to go. So we have to have an understanding of what that relationship is truly going to do for you and how is it going to fulfill you? What are the values it's going to fulfill? And then once we have a firm understanding of that, then I go down the values and ask the person, are you, and I insert the value to find out how do they generalize themselves. So
How do they
you mentioned
generalize?
a few values here. So I would ask you, it's going to sound a little strange, but are you a growing person?
Yes, I'm growth mindset.
Okay, so you believe that about yourself, so that's really good. Are you a sharing person?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's a little hesitation there, so I would want to know a little bit more.
I
So we
had
catch these things. That's what we call a nonverbal cue. So I would want to get in there and find out, well, what was the hesitation about, and then tune it up so that there's no hesitation and you feel it very strongly because you're very connected to your experiences of sharing with others. And then, of course, we go up to these higher and higher values of like happiness and joy, whichever, what are the really high values that you want to experience in a relationship that would bring you true fulfillment? And then we want
Mm.
to know if you generalize yourself that way.
But would you say like you keep referencing like high values, and then I mentioned my values, which didn't seem like it fit it within your kind of definition of high values. So
We didn't
would
quite get there. We'd have to do more elicitation.
okay. So then wouldn't it be like kind of subjective? I mean, like my
Purely
values could
subjective.
seem like because to me happiness is not what I pursue because it's ephemeral. It's like it's very temporary. I seek fulfillment. That's
Mhm.
like one of my high values. It doesn't mean I need to be happy every 24/7, but I'm glad you mentioned peace because like being in that like secure, emotionally safe relationship is whether it's romantic and again friendships, it gives me peace knowing that I'm in a dynamic where I won't be so activated knowing that that person, whether it's a friend or a romantic partner, creates that safe space for both of us to share our vulnerabilities or just be our authentic self by sharing so many different, layers about ourself.
Hmm.
So, would you say that like discovering our values and how we place it in the hierarchy of high or not high is subjective?
Oh, of course it is. But that doesn't mean it's incompatible or there's no one right way. I mean, the way that
Mhm,
you get the most out of your relationships is going to be different from person to person. I
mhm,
want to
mhm,
backtrack a little bit. You said that fulfillment is one of your highest values, and of course it is for everyone because fulfillment implies fulfillment of a value, and value being a generalization about an experience that's important to you. So
mhm, mhm,
what is fulfillment? Fulfillment is when you fulfill multiple values that are very high. So, and then
yes.
when you mentioned happiness, that was interesting because I used to define happiness sort of like you just did about it being kind of temporary, but we can redefine how we think about certain values. And so yes, there is like a temporary state of happiness, but there's also happiness as something you actually are. You're being a happy person, and that doesn't mean that you never get angry. It doesn't mean that you never get frustrated. Of course, we all do. It just means that you believe you are. It's based on real experiences you've had in your life, and because you believe you are, it becomes a
Mm,
self-fulfilling prophecy. And so, when you understand this about all of your values, then you know how to align with them consciously, and it starts to happen unconsciously, and that's where the fulfillment comes. It comes from the combination of fulfilling very high values all at once that creates that.
mhm,
Fulfillment is just a little too vague to really focus on. So we want to find out, well, what are those values that would get you there? So we started off with yours with security, safety, sharing, and growth. But I assure you, there's a lot more that continues on that goes higher and higher and leads to that fulfillment. And so once we know what those values are, and then we check in to see, are these showing up as beliefs you have about yourself, like certain and solid beliefs you have about yourself. And I've never met a person who all of their values did. And this is where I bring in the self-concept model and help that person transform every one of those values into certain and solid beliefs about themselves based on real experiences. We're not faking anything until you make it. We base it on all real experiences. We restructure those experiences so that's the information that they're bouncing off of, both consciously and unconsciously. And so when you are living your highest values, which brings your self-esteem up, brings your confidence up in a very solid and grounded way, then when you're looking for a relationship from that place, you're more likely to attract someone who really reflects your values, who really connects with you. And because you're already fulfilled and happy, you're more likely to attract a similar kind of mate. And exactly the kind of experience that happened to me when I met my wife. And also conversationally, I did a little bit of what I was doing with you. I elicited her values and I shared my values with her, and she didn't understand. I was making this all very conversational. And then I found out really quickly that we were very compatible, which was great. How she wanted to fulfill her values was very compatible with the way that I fulfill my values. And then I created a vision just by explaining it, or just saying, hey, just imagine if, this was our life and this is the way that we lived it. And I plugged in her values and she was like, yeah, that's exactly what I want. And so we've been sort of functioning off of that vision for our relationship based on our values ever since. And it's gone extraordinarily well.
Great, great. How would you then say, because so much of how we see ourselves and our self-identity, as you shared, influences our relationship dynamics again, whether it's romantic or not, but a healthy relationship dynamic, and I tell me if you agree or disagree, requires adaptation, ones of understanding the other person's needs as well as being true to ourselves. So do you have any advice or thoughts around how, once someone has truly discovered their self identity through working through NLP or the self concept model and all of that, and they are in a relationship that they want to continue to foster and grow, how does that balance, what is that healthy balance of honoring their true self, their identity, as well as adapting to their partner?
Well, it's interesting that you say that because your identity is not a set thing. It is, it's not a thing at all. It's not like you can, that's why we call it a self concept. So you're never going to truly know who you are, and no one else can truly know who you are because they can't experience you from the inside and you can't experience yourself from the outside. So what all you really have is what is important to you, and that can change, and it's not static. And so we
Mhm.
can use generalizations like what we call our values, like, well, happiness is important to me, and joy and passion and all these things are important to me. Now how that shows up is going to be different for everybody. What I'm passionate about, you might not necessarily be passionate about. So that's where the adjustment really happens. It's just understanding that like you mentioned, authenticity, which is a great value and it's a great quality to be. And I can't imagine a relationship working very well if one or both partners don't feel authentic, or they don't believe themselves to be, or they're not being authentic. And so what does authenticity mean? When I'm coaching clients, this is one
Mhm.
that they're often afraid of before we go to transform it because they don't
Oh,
feel very authentic. They go, whoa, whoa, I don't know if I want to be this. And so I'll say, well, let's talk about that and understand what the reservations are, because we often do have a lot of resistance to becoming who we want to be and getting what we want. And what a lot of people do, they realize that they have some assumptions about what it means to be authentic that they haven't really explored and unpacked. And one of those is that whatever comes to my mind, I must blurt out to everyone. It's like, that's not a good definition for being authentic. Just because you have a thought or a feeling doesn't mean you need to share it with everyone. That doesn't necessarily make you an authentic person, and not speaking up doesn't make you an inauthentic person. So let's spend some time really sorting out what is important to you about being authentic and how do you go about doing that would work for you. And so, a lot of it is understanding that. So we're not fixed anything. And so we're constantly making adjustments. And it's the moment when we say, well, this is who I am and that's it. It's like, no, like, yes, I do this thing called self-concept and I do all this identity work, But that doesn't mean I know myself in the sense that there's nothing else to know. It's as long as life is happening and life is not static, I'm constantly learning new things about myself. I'm constantly discovering new things. Until you're exposed to something, you don't necessarily know how you're going to respond to it or whether or not you're going to like it. So it's a constant exploration, and it's
Mhm.
just that's the journey of life. And I don't mean this in like some analytical thing. It's like, well, go out there and live your life, and see what happens. And if you're not growing and you're not changing, something's really wrong. That's part of the journey. And then when you're talking about relationships and partnering with someone, that's part of that journey too. Well, how do we make this life work together in a way that is very fulfilling for both of us? And I would say
Mhm.
the number one thing that I come across that is probably the most painful thing is when people, like you mentioned earlier, they don't feel like they're good enough, they don't feel like they are deserving or any of those things. And this is what I call a self-worth issue. And the best way to treat a self-worth issue is to first and foremost to see it for what it is. It's not real. There is no such thing as self-worth. There is no way to measure your worth. There's no metric. There's no objective scale that can measure a person's worth. And so when I work with people on this, because you wouldn't believe, like some of the people who are super successful people and suffer from imposter syndrome, it's the same thing. It's this belief that there is such a thing that can measure my worth. And when I don't feel like my worth is high, then I don't deserve it. And these people who are very successful will find a way to get rid of all of their success because they believe they don't deserve it. So the best thing to do is not to try to raise your self-worth, it's to dissolve that concept entirely because it's not real.
Interesting. Why do you, why, can you expand on that? Why do you believe it's not real? Because there's nothing tied to it. That's
Well, first of all, there's no way to measure it. Okay, so this is where we get into it. So metaphors are very powerful, and we use them in hypnosis and we use them in NLP because they're very powerful at transferring meanings, but they also can create a lot of trouble if they're not used very well. So
Mhm.
I'm not a religious person, but I did grow up in a very religious household. And one of the things that I saw growing up is when people would try to take a religious metaphor and apply it in real life, that creates a lot of problems. And this
Yeah.
is where we get like fundamentalism. It's like if you interpreted the Bible literally and then tried to apply it, you're going to create a lot of problems. You're going to break the law for one thing because you can't do that. So it's better to look at it as a teaching, like a metaphor. Self-worth is nothing more than a metaphor, and it gets painful, it creates suffering, and it creates a lot of problems when you would try to apply that metaphor into real life. So let me ask you, if when you're dabbling in this self-worth thing, how do you know, how do you measure your worth?
I don't measure my worth because my understanding of self-worth is a belief, an internal belief about myself. And this circles
Mm,
back to our conversation of self-identity shaped by
mm,
our beliefs and experiences, right? And so while I don't consider having an issue with self-worth, it was definitely a limiting belief. But back to your point, I don't measure it. It's just a belief that I have, that I know I'm worthy just because of I exist and I am proud of who I am. Just whether I don't tie it to anything external, which I believe self-esteem is to be how we feel about ourselves based on external validation, whether it's accolades or our titles or anything superficial, materialistic. But self-worth, I understand it as just a belief, an inherent belief. And so while it was a limiting belief I was alluding to before, I no longer feel like I struggle with it because I'm very self-assured of who I am and feel just, I believe that I am a worthy, just great person. Obviously, doesn't mean that I'm perfect or anything like that, but I don't tie it to anything external.
okay, so I would say it's those words kind of mean the opposite. So when I
Hmm.
say self-worth, the implication is that my value can be measured. That's what worth by definition means.
Hmm.
Self-esteem is it's how I feel about myself. And
Yes,
that can
yes.
be 100% independent of external factors. So if I value kindness and I go do something kind, even if I do it anonymously and nobody knows that I did it, so I don't get any compliments or anything like that, I still feel good about that. That's self-esteem. So I can self-validate, and that creates self-esteem. If my behavior aligns with my values, I'm going to experience self-esteem regardless if I get an award or anybody even knows it. I know it, and that's what's important. Self-worth implies that it can be measured. Your value can be measured. That's what the word worth means. And so, and this is where words really matter. This is part of the study of NLP. So what implications are there when I talk about self-worth? Well, there's the implication that my worth can be measured. How do I measure my worth? What most people will do, in addition to the awards and all the and compliments and all those things, they will compare themselves to others, which is very destructive. We all do it, but it's very destructive. So I can look at someone who I believe is of low self-worth compared to me, and that might give me a little boost in pride or something, like, something that makes me feel good about myself. And then when I compare myself to people who I believe are better than me, then I'm going to feel bad about myself. And so when you play the self-worth comparison game, you can't only turn it on when you meet people who you feel are low self-worth. It's still going to be turned on when you meet people who you believe is of higher self-worth. So my whole thing is to just drop the whole self-worth thing to begin with. And we know where this comes from. What this idea of deservingness, of worthiness, this comes from early on when we're kids. Most of the time, for the first few years of our life, especially if we have decent parents, we experience being loved unconditionally. I don't have to do anything for it, right? A baby doesn't have to do anything to earn getting its diaper changed, to earn getting fed, to earn being cuddled and and have love expressed. So we get used where this is how we're brought into the world. Now, at a certain point, maybe usually happens around the age of like between 3 and 7. Something gets communicated by the caregiver, the parent, whoever has been giving this unconditional love, in a limited way. And we're not perfect. I have kids, and I know that I've been the way that I've communicated things has since my kids were born hasn't always been great. What happens is you say something to a child like, why can't you keep your room clean like your sister, or why can't you be on top of your homework like the neighbor's kid down the street, or something like that. It often does come from a comparison, not always, but the way that the child interprets this is, now I have to earn this love. It's not unconditional anymore. And now I have to be good enough for it, and I have to do things to earn it. And so this begins the belief in this idea of self-worth. I must earn in order to be loved. I must do something to be worthy of it. And this plagues like 99% of people. And I know that I wrestled with this for the majority of my adult life. And it wasn't until I dissolved that limitation, this idea of self-worth, that my life, the fulfillment that I experienced in my life, and also going for my potential and doing and creating the life that I really love and enjoy, that I live now, that was all possible once I was able to fully resolve that whole self-worth thing. But that doesn't mean, then we do get to keep self-esteem, though. And that is just basically, I feel good about me when I do what I value. And I don't need anyone else to tell me that or measure that for me. But most of the time when people are engaged in the whole self-worth thing, how they go about it is by comparing themselves to others, which is just never going to help you. There's only negatives that follow that.
And certainly in the type of world that we live in, with everything is online, and social media, exacerbates like this kind of putting their highlight reels on. It's very common and easy to kind of fall into the comparison
Sure.
trap. So that's very fascinating. Thank you for expanding on that. That was very interesting to hear. And there's a lot more to uncover. I feel like we're just scratching the surface of even what it means to learn more about ourselves and our self-identity. So with that said, I do want to kind of circle back and kind of wrap this all together. Is there one last thing that you want to share in terms of, because I know this self-concept model is fundamental to the work that you do and for what NLP is. Is there one thing that you would like to share in terms of like understanding like the self-concept model, and why understanding it can be so powerful to any individual looking for any type of transformation in their life?
Sure. Yeah. So we have beliefs. And this is how we navigate the world. This is how we construct our reality. There's beliefs about the world around us, and that includes people or whatever limitations there are about the economy, about all of these things that are external. Well, where do all beliefs originate from? They originate from the uh, essential belief that you have, and I'll call it a belief because I put it in the same category as a belief, and that is the belief of who you are. And that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be based on many smaller beliefs. But self-concept, in a sense, is a belief. And so what I say, it's like the tree trunk and the roots, and your beliefs about everything else are branches. So I can change a belief, say, about the world. So, like, let's say I believe the world is a hostile place, and that's not
Mm-hmm.
serving me very well. So I want to change that belief to the world is an abundant place. Okay. Now that might work, and it might get better. Okay, if I suddenly believe that. But I could have done something different, and that is, again, like I was saying earlier, is to take responsibility for what I'm experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of believing that the world is a hostile place, stop and ask myself, if I believe the world is a hostile place, what must I believe about myself first and foremost that then
Mm.
creates a belief that the world is a hostile place?
Interesting.
And
That
that
definitely
belief,
a deep layer.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and that belief would be something like, not necessarily true for everyone, but that this belief might be something like, I'm a victim. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if I work on that belief and I say to myself, well, what do I want to be instead of a victim?
Mm-hmm.
And then find out what that is and then transform that belief. Well, not only is my belief about the world being a hostile place going to change, it's probably going to change a lot of other beliefs. So the power of changing your beliefs about yourself, your self-concept, is in the wide-ranging effects it will have across many of your beliefs. Some you don't even realize, and that's one of the beautiful things about this process is when you change a belief about yourself, then something else changes, and you had no idea it had any connection
Mm-hmm.
whatsoever. So we'll work with students who change a belief about themselves, and suddenly they stop eating sweets, or that they stop engaging in some sort of destructive or dysfunctional behavior, and they never link the two. They still don't even know why the two were linked at all, but
Mm-hmm.
something about changing a belief about who they are affected many other areas of their life because it tends to have an effect on a wide-ranging effect on many of your beliefs about the external world. So it's much more powerful to go to the source of all of your beliefs yourself rather than to try
Mm-hmm.
to pick out every single little limiting belief you have about everything else.
Fascinating about how uncovering our deeply seated beliefs about ourselves can uncover how it may be linked to other things that we don't know. It actually reminds me, do you know the book Vegetarian? It's a novel by
No.
a recent Nobel Prize winning author. She's Korean.
Hmm.
She was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2024, and it's fascinating. And it made me think of it because it's about how this housewife one day she just says that she's going to be a vegetarian and based on a dream that she had, and then it basically I'm still halfway through it, is unraveling about how her life completely changed based on this one belief now of
Hmm.
herself, and that belief just stemmed from a dream. But anyway, I thought that was kind of it made me think of it because I thought that was a very interesting point you made about
Hmm.
how it may be linked to things that wouldn't even know.
Hmm.
It's fascinating. I have a question that I ask all of my guests at the end of the episode, Damon. It is why the podcast is called PS Younger Self. If you can go back to your younger self at any age and stage in his life to pass on one piece of wisdom, is there anything you would like to tell him?
It's a great question, and I've asked myself this a lot, and I keep
Oh,
coming up with the same answer every single time. And that is, if I could go back to my younger self, pretty much at any stage of my life, I would tell him to relax. It's going to be okay. It's not always going to go your way, but that doesn't mean you can't enjoy it every step of the way. You can absolutely enjoy your life, even when things aren't going well. It's all going to be okay. So yeah, when I look back on my life, I just wish I had relaxed a little more and enjoyed the ride.
so simple, but so profound, right? Relax and enjoy. Beautiful. Now you have to please tell us where people can find you and connect with you more, because certainly there's seems to be a lot more to discover and learn about how NLP can transform people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. My YouTube channel is probably where most people find me. So it's just my name, Damon Cart. And I have many, many videos on NLP. Not 100%, it's not 100% all NLP, but even the videos that are not about NLP are often informed by my experiences with NLP and the, the learnings that I've picked up. And then if you want to just go straight to our website, it's selfconcept.com. And this is where if you're interested in that kind of training or coaching, you can find resources there. And also, if you want to talk to a coach and see if the training is right for you, you can set up an appointment there as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yes, I had some time looking through your YouTube channel. There's a lot of great information there. So
Thank you.
definitely I will link to all those. I really appreciate your time. It has been really wonderful learning so much more about just scratching the surface. I think that's the phrase.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you taking the time and thank you.
Thank you for having me.